Hello, I'm Rit Udison, Executive and Artistic Director at the Loft Literary Center. Welcome to this live stream at Virtual Wordplay. I'm so glad you're here with us. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about what brought us here today. For the last year, the Loft staff has been working hard to put together an outdoor book festival that would have gathered 100 authors with 10,000 visitors in our neighborhood in downtown Minneapolis. As COVID-19 hit, we knew we had to think about everything we do differently, especially this festival. While we were disappointed that we wouldn't be able to gather in person, we became even more committed to supporting writers, celebrating new books, and finding new ways to assert the connective power of the written word. In a time of anxiety, we want to offer a powerful event for readers, writers, and booksellers. When we first approached our sponsors, their first question was, what is a virtual festival? And to be honest, we didn't know. Our founding partners, St. Catherine University and Star Tribune, agreed to make a leap of faith with the Loft. With courage, generosity, and vision, they have worked alongside us to figure out what this virtual festival might become. We are grateful to our sponsors and donors. Their generosity is incredible, but it is not enough. We believe it is essential, especially during a health and financial crisis, to offer programs that are free and accessible to all. But that has led to a significant revenue loss. A live event would have included ticket revenue, beer sales, exhibitor fees, and additional sponsorships. The Loft is not closed. We continue to offer classes, fellowships, conversations, support for readers and writers in addition to this festival. We are here to support the literary community, and we ask that you continue to support us. If you are able, please consider making a contribution to the Loft today. Thank you for being here.
Hey y'all, thank you so much for joining us today. Today's event, we've got Minh Lé and Gene Luen Yang in conversation talking about their graphic novels. Super exciting event. We're going to get started here in a minute. But I just wanted to take a minute first to thank our sponsors, St. Catherine University and the Star Tribune, without whom this would not be possible. I also want to thank our event partner, Ryan Reeds, which is a project of Ryan Companies. And I'm going to pass it off to Minh and Gene for a minute. If you have questions for our authors today, we're going to be taking some audience questions at the end that we'll have some answers for. So wherever you're watching, feel free to type in your question into the chat function, and we'll get to those in the end. But I'm going to pass it off now. Hey, guys.
Thanks so much, Rachel.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having us. So I guess I'm going to get started. Is that how we're going to go? Yeah. All right. Well, I want to thank Minh for doing this. I feel like we have lots of common friends, right? Mm-hmm. And it feels like we should have met by now, but we haven't yet. So it's awesome to at least meet virtually.
It's nice to meet virtually because I keep describing you as like one of my literary heroes, and this way I get to do it without blushing in front of your face. We at least have some virtual distance.
Well, I think we've admired each other mutually for a while. Yeah. So it's
hopefully one day we'll get to meet in person and do this live. But it's I'm so grateful to the Wordplay people for being able to pull this together and keep this going despite everything.
Yeah, that's right. It must have taken a tremendous amount of effort. Yeah. Now, I did just notice that I did not replace my wife's name in my little box. Do you see that? I'm going to leave it there for now. Maybe I'll change it later, but she's the smarter member of our family, so I think it's okay. All right, let me get this. Let me get my PowerPoint up, and then we can get started.
I'll just change my name while you're good.
Work. Yeah. How's that look? You all see the picture of fifth grade me? This is a photo of me when I was in fifth grade, and I was a non-athletic kid. So whenever I tried to play basketball, the games usually went like this. I just had a really hard time focusing on the ball, So it surprised me that I ended up spending 5 years of my life working on a graphic novel about basketball. Dragon Hoops just came out in March. It is a 400-page basketball book that I both wrote and drew. And this story really begins with this guy right here. So I used to be a high school teacher. I taught at Bishop O'Dowd High School in Oakland, California. And Dragon Hoops is a nonfiction graphic novel about the varsity men's team during the 2014-2015 season. The coach of that team is this guy right here. His name is Coach Lou Ritchie. We taught on the same campus for about a decade, but I didn't really get to know him until the beginning of the 2014-2015 season. I sat down with him and he told me this crazy story from when he was a kid. And that is really the beginning of Dragon Hoop. So I'm going to tell you that story right now. This is actually in chapter 1 of the book. So Lou isn't just a teacher at Bishop O'Dowd, he's also an alum. So he graduated in 1989. He was on the varsity men's team, and when he was a junior, they made it to the California State Championship. This was the biggest game of Lou's life. So he's on the court with 7 seconds left. The Bishop O'Dowd Dragons are down by 1. He gets the ball in his hands, and he puts it up at the buzzer. It goes through the hoop. They win by 1. He's freaking out. He and his teammates are jumping up and down on the court. And then over the intercom, they hear the ref's whistle. So the ref invalidates that shot. Supposedly, the center of the O'Dowd team had his hand on the rim as that ball was falling through the hoop. So it was offensive goaltending. Biggest shot of young Lou's life gets invalidated. He goes on to play in college. He plays for UCLA and then Clemson. Eventually, a hamstring injury ends his career. And then he makes his way back to Bishop O'Dowd, first as an assistant coach and then as a head coach. As an assistant coach and as a head coach, he leads 5 teams to the California State Championships. They lose all 5 times. So he has this chance to redeem, he's 5 chances to redeem this old hurt, and he just loses all 5 times. One of the big reasons why I wanted to follow his team for the 2014-2015 season was because he had these 2 kids on his team, Ivan Rabb and Paris Austin, who were the best basketball players that had been at Bishop O'Dowd in a generation. So supposedly the 2014-2015 season was Lou's best chance at finally redeeming this old hurt. So I wanted to see if he could do it. Like I said, I was super surprised that I ended up doing a book about basketball that took 5 years of my life. But really, I think I was drawn to that book because of the story itself, because of Lou's story. Because even when I was a kid, even in 5th grade, I was a story kid, and specifically I was drawn to comic book stories. This right here is the very first comic of my collection. It was a Superman comic. I have to tell you though, even though Superman was in my first comic, even though the first comic of my collection was from DC, I was definitely more of a Marvel guy. For whatever reason, when I was a kid, I just thought Spider-Man and the Hulk were way cooler than Superman. Superman, honestly, I thought of as kind of a dork. He was like a square. He always did the right thing. He was like this, big blue Boy Scout who flew around Metropolis looking for good deeds to do. Eventually, though, I realized that Superman's dorkiness reminded me of my parents' dorkiness. So I have immigrant parents. Both my parents were born in Asia. They both came to the United States for graduate school. And when I was a kid, I just noticed that my parents were always these rule followers. They tried to live the straight and narrow, kind of like Superman. They always paid their taxes on time, tried not to break any traffic laws. They're just squares. They never had any wild parties. But as I got older, I realized maybe the reason why there were such squares is because they wanted to be perfect citizens. They knew they didn't, people perceived them as being foreign. So maybe they tried to be perfect citizens to keep people from questioning their citizenship. I also wonder if the same dynamic is true of Superman. Superman was created by children of immigrants, people kind of like me. Siegel and Schuster, the creators of Superman, were the children of Jewish immigrants from Europe. And I wonder if they embedded this idea into their story, into this hero, whether they were aware of it or not. So that really is the motivating idea behind my other book that's coming out this season. Superman Smashes the Klan will be out in May of this year. It's an adaptation of an old story from the Superman radio show in 1946. Superman actually took on the Ku Klux Klan on his radio show. And at the center of that story was this Chinese-American family, which made it totally fascinating for me. So the way the story goes is a Chinese-American family moves into Metropolis. A group of hooded racists gets really freaked out about it. They feel threatened, so they burn a wooden cross on this family's lawn. And then Superman leaps in to the Chinese family's defense. This is considered one of the most important stories in the Superman mythos because it had a real-world effect. Supposedly, after the storyline aired, the membership of the real-life Klan went down. It actually declined significantly. Superman has always been an American icon. Since his very beginning in 1938, he's been considered an American icon. But I would say since 1946, since he defended this Chinese-American family on his radio show, he's been a symbol of a specific vision for America. He's been a symbol of an America that is multicultural, where we are bound not by blood, not by even a shared cultural history, but by a sense of ideals and a view of the future, a view of tomorrow. I hope that all comes through in this book that I did with Guri Hiru. So all the art that you've seen from the book is drawn by this amazing art team named Guri Hiru. I feel incredibly lucky to have worked with them. But I hope you'll check it out, and I hope that idea comes through. Thank you. So I'm going to hand it off to Minh now.
Okay, thanks, Gene. Let me pull up my screen. Oh, I think you have to stop yours for me to get mine going. Okay, let's see. Okay, can you see that? Okay, so thanks for the quick rundown of your books. I have read both of them, and they're amazing. I thought I had my copy of Dragon Hoops here, but it's with my 8-year-old downstairs because he's plowing through it right now. But yeah, I thought I would just give you a quick rundown. Like Gene, we decided to start with a picture of us as kids. So this is me at an early age. If you look closely, you can see there's already some early onset writer's block setting in on this little boy's face. And a lot of times when I go to schools, kids ask me, like, when did you know you wanted to be a writer? When did you know you wanted a life in books? And I never really had an answer for that until one of my good friends from growing up, his name is Eamon Wisniewski, he was cleaning out his house, and he found this book of poems that we had to do for a school project. So I thought I'd share that real quick. This is me. I'm not sure how old I am, but I am apparently a huge fan of denim in all its different forms. And this is the poem that I wrote back then. So it says, Books by Minh Lé. A book is the key to your imagination that will open the way to a magical location. It can be somewhere mysterious or somewhere serious. It can be somewhere exciting or somewhere inviting. You can meet someone nice or someone as cold as ice. You might meet someone once. You may meet them twice. So here I go to a land far away on a tropical vacation, and I don't have to pay. So I like sharing that with kids because it's obviously that I was such a shy kid, but it was obviously at an early age I was already thinking about the power of books and the power of stories and what they can do to help us escape or bring us together. And I'm primarily a picture book writer, so I was very surprised one day to get a call from DC Comics. They called up one day and they said, we're about to start a line of graphic novels for young readers, and we would love to invite you to pitch us an idea. And my first reaction was, I think you have the wrong Minh Lé because I write picture books. And thankfully that wasn't the case. So after I picked up my job off the floor, I started looking at the different characters in the DC universe. And there's so many amazing characters, like Gene was going through some of them before. But so I looked at like Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, everybody. I even had a brief pitch for a story about an obscure character named Firestorm. But then I got to Green Lantern. And this was a character I grew up with, I knew and was familiar with, but not one that I had like really sunk my teeth into before. But this time when I was looking at it with fresh eyes, there was something vaguely, oddly familiar about it. So for those of you who are not familiar, Green Lantern is a character who is defined by their strength of will. So there are lots of different Green Lanterns in the universe, and they have this green ring, power ring, that's drawn to the individual's strength of will. And from there, once they have the ring, they can create all these constructs, they can fly, they can do all these amazing things. But the genesis of the character's power is their own willpower. And so when I was looking at this, I was like, there's something vaguely familiar about this character's construction, this character's backstory. And that's when I realized it was because I knew someone who fit that description. And so I had this image of my grandmother, my Banoy, who always wore a jade ring, and she's one of the strongest people I know. She has this incredible willpower. You would not want to get on the wrong side of her. But I'm Vietnamese American, and I was born here in the States, but a lot of my family had to escape Vietnam during the war. And she's very much responsible for willing our family out of Vietnam during a particularly harrowing time. So she was always a true hero in our family story. And so when I was thinking about an entry point into a comic, it made sense to start with her. So I pitched this idea to DC Comics, and that's how we came up with Green Lantern Legacy. Thankfully, they were all about it. And they paired me up with Andy Tong, who's this amazing artist, and he really kind of like went all in and captured a lot of this world. So the book is about a 13-year-old Vietnamese American boy named Tai. He lives with his parents and his grandmother, and unfortunately one day she passes away. And then he ends up, her jade ring ends up in his hands. And then he finds out that it wasn't a jade ring, it was actually a Green Lantern power ring. And his grandmother had been a superhero this whole time, and he just didn't realize it. So the story follows him as he's learning about his grandmother's secret superhero past, then also learning how to become a Green Lantern himself. So once I had the vague idea for that story, things started to fall in place. And a lot of the iconography of the Green Lantern world started to make sense with some of the cultural details I grew up with. I was lucky enough to go to Vietnam this summer, and there were literal Green Lanterns all over the place when we were walking down the streets. Then even one time I went into a hotel elevator, and right there on the ground was this very random Green Lantern symbol in the elevator. So a lot of it seemed to make sense. And Gene and I will talk about this a little bit later, but I also incorporated some Vietnamese history in here, partially because within the Vietnamese community, the immigrant and refugee story, like kind of what Gene was talking about, is such a strong part of the fabric of our identity. And I grew up looking to comics and stories for stories of heroism. And it wasn't until I got older that I kind of realized that I didn't need to look outside for those stories, that those stories were embedded already within my own family, within my own community. So the idea of taking those stories of kind of like everyday heroism and turning it into a superhero was something that I thought was really, really important, really gratifying. And then so a lot of the story centers around like the generational divide and like how you define legacy, whether or not you gain strength from your community or whether you are pushing away from it. And it was a great way to kind of honor not only my grandmother, but a lot of people from that generation, and just like the idea of the heroes that are already part of our lives. And then I was lucky enough to, when I went to Vietnam this summer, I got to go and visit my 97-year-old grandmother, this is my other grandmother on my mom's side, who is also a superhero in her own right. I got to share the book with her and even give her her own Green Lantern power ring, which is so much fun. And it was so great to be able to like show her how I was seeing her in that heroic light. So that is Green Lantern Legacy. I hope if you read it, I hope you enjoyed it. And if not, I hope that it ends up in your hands sometime. So I'm gonna stop the sharing so you can see our faces again. There.
So as I told Minh before we started the public part of this talk, this book has made its way around our home. We have 4 kids, and they all loved it. This fit right in with everything they love. And I really especially appreciate it. I mean, that photo of your grandma with the Green Lantern ring is so cute. It's amazing.
I know, I'll have to work that into another book at some point, but it's so much fun to share. When I share that at schools, especially from the kids, but also the teachers, you get lots of like oohs and ahs. And just
yeah. It's just, there's something really heartwarming about that, right?
No, thank you.
And I have to wonder, actually, I mean, both in your book and in that photo, I wonder if the part of the heartwarming feeling comes from seeing the symbol of heroism with an Asian face. Mm-hmm. Like, do you want to talk a little bit about that? What it was like as to kind of put that together?
Yeah, I mean, I think like you, when I was a kid, I loved comics but I didn't always, I had to find my way into the characters, right? Like you, when you're looking at Superman, it didn't, as a character, it didn't initially resonate with you personally until you found that angle. And so for me, growing up, I didn't necessarily see heroes with from this particular background. And more specifically, broader than comics, as a Vietnamese American, to the bookstore, the library, there's this huge section on Vietnam, but it's all about the war and all from the US perspective. So it's this idea of kind of like reclaiming the narrative, because I grew up with the country and the people as just like the backdrop to like American historical trauma, right? Which is a weird place to be as a kid. So the idea of writing ourselves back into the narrative and centering people like my grandmother, who went through such harrowing circumstances and like demonstrate like true heroism, it was an opportunity to expand what I thought the literature was including in their definition of heroism, right? And I think the more that we expand that, the better off we all are. Like, if you have a broader template for who can be a hero, and when you're out in the world, I think that as a public consciousness can play a big role. I'm not sure if that comes into play for you when you're writing a lot too.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I was working on Superman Smashes the Klan, I realized just how powerful stories can be. Like the stories we tell about other people, and especially the stories that like a dominant majority tells about a minority, can really affect all sorts of things about that minority. One of the questions that I struggled with in the beginning, I don't even know if struggle is the right word, but one of the questions I wanted to answer in the beginning was why that writer's room chose to put a Chinese American family in the middle of that Superman storyline from 1946, right? In one sense, it was awesome to see somebody who looked like me in a story that dates back almost to the very beginning of Superman. But in another sense, I just thought, why? It seems like a non-obvious choice for them to make. And I think some of that is because of the story change that had happened for Chinese Americans at around that time. So before World War II, the dominant story about Chinese Americans was that we were threatening, that we were drug addicted, that we were criminals. If you wanted to buy some drugs, you would go to Chinatown to do it. And then almost overnight, the story about us shifted because of the attack on Pearl Harbor. So immediately after that, America realized that China was our greatest ally against the Empire of Japan. And then the story about Chinese Americans went from being us as criminals to us as brave and loyal and patriotic. So at the end of the war, that allowed us to move into the suburbs, these previously all white suburbs, the way the Lee family did. So it just, I think it just demonstrates how powerful a story can be. And now, like, seeing icons of heroism kind of paired up with Asian faces, I think is especially important, because we're kind of experiencing another story shift right now, right, as Asian Americans.
Yeah, and it's such a timely comment, because with the pandemic that we're in right now, you're obviously seeing another shift, like you said, to the Asian American community. And I think one of the things that's very enlightening is the narratives that you're talking about, and all those shifts are often out of our control as a community.
Yes.
It's like a narrative that is imposed upon us and pulled, like, given and taken away, depending on the whims of the current events and history. Like how you said, like going from being the yellow peril to being the model minority, now back to being like being this yellow peril. It's like, it's the sense that your own identity is so contingent upon other people's perception, kind of drives home the need to kind of control your own narrative whenever you can, right?
Yeah,
That heartbreaking image that's been making the rounds on Twitter about that, with the Asian or Asian American nurse in Denver who was like standing in front of this car and being berated by someone saying go back to China, right? It's like, and it's such a heartbreaking visual. But it's that insidiousness of racism that kind of strips people of their individuality and their humanity, and then slots them into your own kind of like warped sense of who a community is, right? So like that nurse who is on the front lines trying to save people is very much a hero, gets their humanity stripped away, and now all of a sudden they are villainized in this other person's narrative, and it's such a heartbreaking thing to watch in real time. And so to the extent that we as authors can like put stories out there, it's always a weird thing. Like during times of crisis, it's like, what is the role of storytellers, right? It's like when you see medical professionals and people working in grocery stores to keep everything stocked, it's like, and people are actually putting their lives on the line, it puts things in perspective, and you're like, so what is our role in all this? And you want to believe that even if it's a secondary impact, that the idea of putting stories out there that reaffirm our collective humanity or the humanity of a particular group is adding value to our social imagination and our ability to empathize with each other. So when I think about, it's hard to trace back a lot of these issues, but a lot of the issues, when you trace them back, come down to the idea that our inability to see each other as fully human, right? Mm-hmm. So you want to think that stories can allow for the expanding of that ability, and hopefully that leads to something tangible. At least that's what the hope is. I don't know if you feel that same kind of like tension when you're.
I feel it. I feel the helplessness. You know, like I have a brother-in-law who is a doctor. My own brother is a doctor, and sometimes, you know, I do these little doodles on a page, and it just feels like, I mean, I feel non-essential. I feel like that sometimes. I feel like that label is so apt compared to what they do, or you know, even the UPS guy that came and picked up a package from my house. I feel so non-essential compared to that guy.
Yeah.
But I think you're exactly right. Like at some point, things are gonna start opening up, and we're gonna have to start rebuilding, right? And another thing that I learned from doing the research for Superman Smashes the Klan, and even Dragon Hoops. Like in Dragon Hoops, I talk about this historic game that was played between the Minneapolis Lakers and the Harlem Globetrotters that ended up being a moment not just for basketball history, but American history, right? And that happened in 1948, 3 years after the end of World War II. So the end of any crisis is a time to rebuild, and it's actually a chance to kind of rebuild something better than what came before. And I think that happened after World War II in a limited way. What I became convinced of after doing some of this research for both of these books is that a lot of the strife that we saw, you know, in the 60s all the way up until now, a lot of the inequities were really because America did not, like we didn't go as far as we should have with after World War II. We didn't rebuild the way we should have after that particular crisis, right? And a very concrete example of that was just sort of the uneven application of the GI Bill after like if the GI Bill had been applied well, I just think that the conversations during the 60s, 70s and on would have been really different. And we have another chance like that, like right now. As soon as things start opening up, we're going to have to rebuild. And stories are like the building blocks of culture, right? That's how we're going to rebuild. So we have to tell the right stories now.
Right. Like who controls the narrative ends up shaping how those policies are made going forward. And something I'm kind of thinking out loud now, based on what you're saying, a lot of times when I talk to people about comics and superhero stories, it's like what I love about superhero stories is when they highlight and when they shine a light on things that are very human, right? It's like, so you have these like kind of extraordinary circumstances in the book, but they're based on something very human and very relatable. And when I think kind of like the photo negative of that with the pandemic, it's like, it's shining a light and emphasizing all these inequities that were already there, right? It's like, it's not that these are brand new. It's like, these are structural issues that have always been there, but a pandemic makes them suddenly pulls the cover off everything and like explodes those inequities into a scale that is beyond imagining, right? But it's like if and when we're lucky enough to get to that other side, you're right. It's like we need to take a deep look at like what exactly those structural things are and how to rebuild in a way that's not just kind of like papering it over and then just building upon those inequities in the same kind of way. and it's a huge undertaking. And I think it's also a huge exercise in the imagination to think about like what that could look like if it has to be so drastically different from what we have had. Like that's going to take a certain kind of storytelling, like you said, to move forward in a way that's actually productive.
Yeah. It's gonna. I mean, it's gonna take stories just for us to think it through properly. Right. I think. Yeah.
So hopefully there's a role for us in some way in this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I joke about it with my some of my cartoonist friends. We've been Zooming since this happened, and we're like, everybody right now is kind of being forced to live like a cartoonist. Like we're all kind of holed up in our own rooms. We spend a lot of our time alone with our own thoughts, or and that's just kind of how cartoonists live even before all this hit. But the good part of that is I do think, I guess the silver lining is that this period of isolation can be a time to really think about how things ought to be, to engage the imagination, to think about how we're going to rebuild. What are our goals in our rebuilding?
Mm-hmm. And when we talk about and that's a great point. And then one thing that it makes me think about is, like, you were part of, I saw you post up the Creators for Comics auction, right? And over the past week, all these creators have come together to like auction off drawings or books to benefit comic shops and indie bookstores. And when I think about, we're talking about like the different definitions of heroism and stuff like that, it's like one thing that has really inspired me through all this is like so many people putting themselves out there who are already struggling, right? People struggling and finding with themselves to help other people that are struggling, and those people who are struggling also helping. Like this pandemic is affecting everybody at different levels, but the way that people are trying to help each other is something that I think is inspiring and is something that gives you hope when you're trying to build upon the next steps, right? That people have, at least a lot of people, have this like innate instinct to help and to try to extend themselves when possible. And that's something that I've been trying to hold on to. When I dip into the wells of despair around 9 or 10 o'clock every night, I myself back up with those stories.
I have that too. I have that same well of despair at my house that opens up late at night. It's true though. It's true. It's nice to see common people, like, normal people, people not in costumes doing heroic things. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I've had to start a policy like just like turning off Twitter at like 9 or 10 o'clock, just because otherwise it's like 3 hours later and I've done nothing but ravage my own soul looking at the news.
Yeah, I have the same thing. I asked my wife to turn on the parent controls on my phone and put a time limit on Twitter, so I could figure out when I need to stop.
Yeah, no, I'm terrified to look at like my screen time stats. I'm like, no, I'm like.
Well, on a happier note, so you did grow up with superheroes in your life. Were there any heroes that you were particularly drawn to? It seems like maybe Green Lantern wasn't one of them when you were a kid. You found that connection later. Yeah,
I was trying to think about this, and I did read comics a lot, but the thing that resonated with me more is like kind of like one step before is Greek mythology, because a lot of times I think of comics as like the modern mythology, right? And my love for it is kind of traced back to those heroic stories from Greek mythology. So something I tell kids a lot is like, I grew up reading like stories about Hercules, right? And like the 12 labors of Hercules. And you would be hard pressed to find someone who looked any more different than Hercules than this like skinny Vietnamese American kid from Connecticut with like absolutely like no musculature whatsoever. But I love those stories, and I was able to kind of like find my way into that character despite all the differences, right? And just like you find those personality traits that you want to like hook onto, or imagine how you would handle certain trials. So for me, that was like kind of like the entry point into how to find my way into a story about heroism, right? And one thing that I think about a lot now is like when we're putting out stories with a broader visualization of who can be a hero. For me, there was a lot of inherent literary value to being a kid and finding an entry point to a character who looked absolutely nothing like me, right? So when I think about the value of putting out a Vietnamese American superhero, it's like on the one hand, you have the readers who will have that direct connection and resonance, and like, oh, I finally see a superhero who looks like myself. Then you also have readers who have completely different backgrounds, and if they can find their way into this character the same way that I found my way into a character like Hercules, and kind of see past all those kind of like surface level or deeper differences to find those similarities. I think there's a huge value there in like kind of like that empathetic leap right into a character, and that's kind of like there's so many different hopes when you write when you create a character, and that's one of those that like you'll allow new readers to be forced into making that jump. And then also something I talked about too is like for those readers who are used to seeing themselves in the spotlight and as the hero, there is a lot of value in just like realizing that you don't have to be the hero of every story. That like there are stories that where it's okay to be on the sidelines. I spent most of my childhood reading from the sidelines, and it was like, and there's a lot of value there. So switch it. The world's not going to end if you're not the center of the story. I think that's also a valuable lesson.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's exactly right. I mean, it goes back to the whole mirrors and windows thing, right? We all need mirrors and we all need windows.
Yeah, if we need to write a new superhero story, Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop would be a great template for the hero.
Absolutely, I totally agree. Well, maybe we should take some questions from other folks. Does it seem like a good time to do that?
Sure does. Yeah, we'll take some questions from our audience. So if you're watching, I'm back to take those, and I'm keeping an eye on the chat. So feed your questions right into there, and we'll try to get to as many as we can here. For both of you, our first question is a three-parter. So,
wow.
From Jerry, who asks, if you had a chance to get any superpower you wanted, what would it be? Why? And how would it happen? What's the origin story?
Wow. Okay, I know exactly what superpower I want. I want the power to multiply myself, like Multiple Man in Marvel Comics. And the reason why I want that power is because I missed 3 deadlines last year. And I think if I could multiply myself, that wouldn't have happened. How I would get that, I think I'd probably have to bite something radioactive, right? Maybe something that would reproduce really quickly. Like maybe I would bite, instead of it biting me, I would bite a radioactive rabbit, and I would be able to, replicate myself in as fast of a fashion as rabbits do.
That's a great response, and not understand because that was also my response. So I need to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But I also don't think I have as many deadlines as you do. I'm actually going to steal this one from my youngest son, who's 5. We were talking about this the other day, and he said, if I could have a superpower, it would be to take all the supervillains' powers and turn them and absorb their power, and then use it for good. So I'm not sure how exactly how I would get that. Maybe I have to get bitten by a supervillain, or maybe I would have to bite the supervillain. But to be able to absorb and reflect that power in a good way would be the answer that I'm stealing from my youngest son.
That's a great answer.
I love that. That's so wholesome. Some really vampiric origin stories. I love it. Our next question is from Bao, who asks, Bao says, you're both creators who don't shy away from writing about issues such as racialized xenophobia. You're also both parents. How does it feel to be Asian American fathers, specifically, and creators during this time of heightened racist xenophobia?
You want to take this one first?
Sorry, I made it really serious after that kind of fun question.
Yeah, no, thank you, Val. It's a great question, and I think it kind of relates to what we were talking about before. As a father and as an author, you're trying to help create a pathway forward for young readers, right? Not to tell them which way, but to expand the pathways that are available to them. If there's all this racism coming in and that's all they see, then it's going to be harder for them to, the onus is going to be on them to carve out their own story, which has value in itself. But to show them that that is not the only narrative that exists, I think is important. And we talked about this before, but like when you have dehumanizing rhetoric coming from all sides, including from the highest offices in the land, if you have stories that can emphasize your own humanity and the humanity of those people around you to counteract those narratives, I think that is something that as a father and an author is something that I want to put out there, just like to create that counterweight, right? Because that's not the narrative that I believe in. That's not the narrative that I think should dominate. And when it is dominating, it's like we need all the voices we can to push back against that. So if I can add one story to the scale to counteract that, then hopefully that does something.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same with me as well. I do think about my kids a lot when I'm writing. I think about how I want them to see themselves and how I want them to see the world. I want to give them tools to see as clearly as possible, I think. And obviously with just a single story in their head. So providing that counterweight, for all the other stories that are floating around, I think is super important. This is kind of a weird time. I think it's a really there's a lot of distressing things in the news in general, but for Asian Americans in particular, I think I don't know. I've been a little shocked, to be honest. I've been a little shocked at how quickly things have come out, and the narrative about us has changed. And maybe I was just being really naive. Like that shock is just more of an unclear view of what the world is actually like. But it just, I think it just points to exactly the need that Minh was saying about better stories, about stories that are more true.
And I think about this a lot with the idea of being a parent. And I think about like when we were kids, the idea of like social media was not even on the landscape, right? And it's like, how do you, as a parent, prepare yourself for the unknown challenges that are going to come? Like, no one could have predicted a pandemic to this extent, to this scope. And so the terrifying thing for me as a dad is like, I don't know what the big problem is that my kids are going to face when they get there, And I think when I think about writing and stories, it's like, and parenting, it's trying to leave my kids, and in the same way, leave readers with a baseline of knowing that we're there for them, right? It's like, so that no matter what the challenges are, those undefined challenges that come up, they'll be strong in the knowledge that they are loved, that they have value, that they're not alone. And for me, that means that if I can give that to my kids and have them use that moving forward for whatever comes their way, then I'll be not satisfied, but I'll be at least happy on one front.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you both. Our next question is for Minh, and it's about your creative process. Linda is wondering if you can talk a little bit about the process of transitioning to graphic novels and how that affected your thinking about storytelling and narrative construction.
Sure. It's funny because if I'm primarily a picture book author, and if you look at my picture book manuscripts, it's like one page, like front and back, and so it's like very slim and like take a very light touch, and it's very much a collaborative process with the illustrator. Except that with the picture book, you're not talking to the illustrator through the process. So I just try to be very light touch, hand it off to the illustrator and kind of let them work their magic. With a graphic novel, it was a lot different because it's a lot more hands-on. And then to suddenly have to go from like a 32-page picture book with like very little text to a 120-page manuscript, it was a little bit terrifying at first. I was like, do I have enough to say to fill 120 pages? And there were definitely stages where I was like, the answer is no. But then you kind of work through it. And then I really got to appreciate the space that gives you as a storyteller. It's kind of like explore some of these characters in different ways, kind of have like side stories that can kind of come in and weave in. It gives you the room to expand the narrative in a different way. I would say for me, graphic novels and comics have turned out to be a really great transition because I love to tell stories through my picture books that are conveyed mostly visually. So when we're doing a comic, it's like very much the same. It's like a long form picture book, and that like I just have the story to tell, but it's like mostly visual. And how can I get enough on the page of the manuscript to let the artwork carry the day? So to me, it just feels like going from a short story to a novel. I think a lot of the skills and the creative processes that go with being a picture book author translate well. And Gene and I were actually talking about this before, like the difference between doing a picture book and a graphic novel and how different that can feel.
Yeah. I remember hearing from picture book authors that they're not supposed to put anything about the visuals in their script, and I was shocked because if you do that in a comic book script, the artist is going to call you on it, right? They're going to be like, "You are not doing your job. You need to give me some descriptions." But I guess in the picture book world, it's more like you want to give the artist the freedom to do what they need to do.
Yeah, I always joke that as a picture book author, I think my headphone just died. So can you still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. As a picture book author, I always joke that I found like a cheat code to making books because I will put down like this one page of notes and like very light text, and then send it off, and it becomes this beautiful book.
Nice. Cool. Thank you. I think we have time for just a couple more here. We have a question from Miriam, who asks, how does your subject matter affect your visual style for both of you?
I'll let you go first, Gene.
Well, I do some books where I do both the writing and the drawing, and other books where I only do the writing and somebody else draws it. I would say for the books that I do where I do the art, I have a fairly limited art style. I can only really draw one way, and in general, I will try to like the books that I draw myself. I'll do it if I feel like it's really personal and I need that full control. I need to be able to control every line on that page, For the books where I choose to collaborate with somebody else, it's usually because I feel like I don't have the writing or the drawing chops to handle it. Like, for instance, Superman Smashes the Klan. There's just no way I could have pulled that book off on the art side. We really wanted the art to feel like a combination of those old Fleischer Superman cartoons, from the 1940s, and modern manga. I can't draw like that. And Gurihiru, the artist of the book, totally can. I feel like they completely nailed that style, what we were going for.
Yeah, for me, since I don't do the illustrations, it's a little bit different. But I think as a writer, my goal is always to leave as much room as possible for the illustrator to work. So I'm writing to the illustrator, almost like imagine like a relay race. Like I'm just like getting to finishing my lap and like handing it off. And my goal is to hand it off in a way that will allow the illustrator to just like take off and enhance, like play to their strengths as much as possible. So yeah, I can't take credit for the visual style, but I will because the illustrator's not here. But yeah, so that's my answer.
Cool. Thank you. I think this will be our last one from Daniel, who asks, who says, both of you in DC have written and created young Asian American characters looking up to other older legacy heroes and growing up. What would it look like to have an older, more mentor type Asian American hero that would serve as a role model?
That's a great question. For me, I kind of tried to weave that into the story because a lot of times people ask me, like, oh, what is it like to write like a Vietnamese boy as a superhero? I was like, it's great, but my real driving force behind the story was like writing a grandma superhero. For me, I was like, that was what I wanted to sink my teeth into, like the idea of, because that's something I hadn't seen very often, like the idea of not only an Asian American or an Asian superhero, but one that was of an older generation. And for me, I've always grown up with the idea of like reverence for my elders, and my grandparents mean so much to me. The idea of like capturing the superheroism of that generation in that particular age group as a grandparent was really great. So it was important to me that even though we were introducing a young Green Lantern, that they were drawing upon the strength of an older superhero as well. So there was already that kind of, that mentor-mentee aspect was something that I definitely felt and wanted to roll in there.
I did a series for DC Comics called New Superman, and it's about a Chinese Superman, not Chinese American, but the Chinese living in China. And his mentor is an old DC character named I Ching, who was Wonder Woman's kung fu master in the 1970s. So he's not an awesome character. I think a lot of the Asian characters from the 1970s were not awesome. But what we were trying to do as the New Superman team was to kind of bring out a little more nuance in him, you know, as a mentor character. I do think the trap with writing Asian or Asian American mentors is to fall into that like wise old kung fu master idea. And the workaround that we wanted to use was to make him more of a three-dimensional character with flaws and maybe with a little bit of a libido, you know, like that kind of thing. So I hope to do it again. I think it was fun, and I do think that the questioners or the person who posed the question is right. We do need more Asian and Asian American mentors who are three-dimensional.
Totally. Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for joining us for this. We at the Loft are so glad that you could join us virtually, if not in person this year. And I just want to give another shout out to our event sponsor, Ryan Reeds, as well as our presenting sponsors, St. Catherine University and the Star Tribune, without whom this or any of our other events would not be possible. You can find links to buy Minh and Gene's books on our website on the landing page for this event. So go do that. I believe the book sales for both of these books in this event are going through Red Balloon Bookstore. So support our local Twin Cities booksellers and hit that purchase the book link. You can also find more information about the Loft, our year-round programs, and about Wordplay programming specifically at loftwordplay.org. And if you want to throw a few dollars our way to keep programs like this possible in the future, we would love you forever. Yeah, thanks so much again. Buy these guys' books, support the Loft, tune in for more events. We have so many more coming up throughout this week and into next week. Minh and Gene, thanks so much again for joining us. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
for having us.
Yeah, like I said, I'm bummed we don't get to meet in person, but hopefully we will in the future. And thanks for pulling this all together.
Yeah, thank you, Loft. This was great.
Yeah, stay safe out there.
Yeah.